So we come to the grand finale of our symposium today, the keynote address by Peter Wiegold. Peter Wiegold has long been a leading innovator on the British music scene, with a history of looking radically at all aspects of the process of music making. In particular, he has been a pioneer of and leading exponent of bringing together composition, improvisation, and conducting. He has a distinguished record as a conductor of contemporary music, but also often works as a creative director, working directly with musicians to make new work. He also often directs purely improvised performances using his own set of signals. Peter often directs his ensemble or group, Note Inégale, from the keyboard, and has provided much of their material from full scores to backbone scores for his William Blake Cycle, Damn Braces, recomposition of Miles Davis, Bitches Brew, to fragments of material as the starting point for making pieces live with the ensemble in the recording studio, such as the forthcoming album, I Cried to Dream Again. Recent works include his highly acclaimed large-scale work for the BBC Proms entitled He is Armoured Without for the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, which was shortlisted for the Royal Philharmonic Society Large-Scale Composition Prize, featuring musicians from Uzbekistan, the Coldstream Guards, 80 other brass players, and solo trumpet and trombone from Note Inégale, Torben Hultmark and David Purser. Also, to the Shades of the Departed, a saxophone concerto for Tim Garland and the Northern Sinfonia for the Sage International Jazz Festival in 2008, and many other pieces. Peter has been a regular conductor of the Composers Ensemble and has also conducted BCMG, the London Sinfonietta, Endymion Ensemble, Northern Sinfonia, South Bank Sinfonia, Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and many other ensembles across the world. In May 2007, he opened the Cologne Triennial Festival with a performance of Berrioz's Accordo for 4 wind orchestras. And he was delighted in 2008 to be appointed Artist in Association with Birmingham Contemporary Music Group. So a warm welcome to Peter. And thank you very much for agreeing to address the symposium today.
Thanks, George. Yeah, we must get up to date from 2008 to 2002.
Well,
but that's good. Thank you for that. And thank you very much for the invitation to this very special and timely conference, to look at, as you say, new cultural paradigms with our changing context, particularly technological and cultural. George said in his invitation to me that reconsidering is crucial. And of course, this has been a key factor in Western music throughout history. Look how fast Western music has changed from 1500 to now, from Monteverdi and Renaissance through to the multiplicities of today. Almost too fast. Maybe we can argue that reconsidering has also been a problem in Western music, as well as the nature of it. But we have to trust every part of that journey. People once said Schoenberg and Webern were the future, and Stravinsky was an oddity. They thought it was the German way, the Central European way forward. But of course, Stravinsky actually wasn't an oddity. He was a harbour. Is that the word? He harboured also. Anyway, whatever that word is, he was singing of the future. And then people said music stopped with Schoenberg and only restarted with Steve Reich, which of course is nonsense. So we must treasure everyone on that long journey in the West, and particularly people who stood at the cornerstones of history. Like I think of Monteverdi, Bach, Mahler, Schoenberg, Stravinsky, Cage, Stockhausen, Berlioz, Steve Reich. Interesting, those people that stood on the corners, on the changes, as well as Beethoven, who did extraordinary things. There's a picture of Monteverdi and Steve Reich. But now, immediately, we must say, what about Miles Davis? What about the Beatles? What about Bob Dylan? What about the great court music of Korea, the gamelan of Java and Bali, the extraordinary Aboriginal songs of Australia? Now, their musics must be in the discourse of our relationship with sound and history, and not least their practice, the way they made music, as well as the sound of it, the purpose of it. So we must indeed look at new cultural paradigms and cultural, the social, spiritual, environmental context, bigger cultural context. So up from 2008, I'd like to start my story today from an event just 2 weeks ago and then look back. 2 weeks ago, my new orchestra, the Third Orchestra, was reborn at a new venue called Grand Junction in West London. It was born first in its residency at the Barbican Centre in 2019, but not performed since then. So this was a very important moment for me. There's a picture of this wonderful church in West London, which has become an innovative new venue. The orchestra was created by myself and the late John Cumming, who was for 25 years director of production house Sirius and the EFG London Jazz Festival. So respecting the great orchestral traditions of the past, we wanted to create a new orchestra based in multicultural London, reaching to the world, an orchestra without boundaries. Musicians from north, south, east, west are welcome. It's inclusive with a gender balance, 50% Black, Asian and ethnically diverse, with players aged 20 to 70. Here's the logo, circles within circles. Someone mentioned, Isabel, I think, mentioned Kandinsky earlier. This was inspired by Kandinsky's painting Circles Within Circles, although I didn't know it was called Circles Within Circles at the time. But the logo does say a lot about circleness, which is in one way closed, and relationship of circles and so on. These were the musicians at Grand Junction. You can read them, I think, on the screen. An extraordinary group of musicians, most who live in the UK, but from Syria, from Beijing, from Mauritius, from Mumbai. Anushka is from Scotland, but is half West African. Bernard is from Vienna, but studied in India. And I will speak a little about Zoran from Berlin as we go. So, wonderful musicians. And I could talk, as I say, a long time about them, but I think I want to make two really key points. First of all, Max is as much Max as violin. If there was a different violin there, it would be a different actor in the music. He's present as an artist, not an executant, that rather strange classical music term. He's a creator performer, and his voice, this is the crucial point, can affect the whole. And then there's much talk of extended techniques now, but all of these musicians have extended techniques built into their DNA. Consider a single note on a traditional Korean piece played on a Taegeum flute. Everyone is different. Everyone has different vibrato, different tuning, different attack. Consider the slap and grunge in a funky Indian bass player. Consider the tunings, but also the expression of the tunings in an Arabic oud. So, but I want them to use the whole of their instrument, not just the extended end. It's very important, the center of an instrument, as well as the extension, so-called. It's a very strange word, extension. It's an instrument with a wholeness. So we presented our show on the 5th of May, inspired by two poets from very different backgrounds, T.S. Eliot and Ursula Rucker. I just say a little, you can, again, I think you've got this on the screen. So T.S. Eliot, very famous poem, Little Gidding, written about 80 years ago, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flames are enfolded into the crown knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. 3 years ago, I worked with Ursula Rucker, this wonderful poet from Philadelphia. And our show was started with her haiku. And here we have For Babylon to truly fall, we must once again carry fire on our heads, speak in holy tongues. So we had this wonderful moment of the crown knot of fire meeting the holy tongues. And what's really important to me is this is a real symbol of the work of the Third Orchestra and of my work, that you have a fiery contemporary US black woman and a distinguished upper middle class Englishman from 80 years ago, and they meet in the fire. They have the same spirit. We're looking for the meeting. So I've only just got the material from this, the 3.5 terabytes of material from this show, and so I haven't been able to mix it properly, but I wanted to give you a sense of it. So if we play George video 1, I put some photos, and then you will you hear lots of snapshots of the music of these 6 pieces that formed one continuous show at Grand Junction. Okay, thank you. The show opened and closed with Wang Zhao, amazing erhu player. So talk a bit about the process, as we say in academia, the creative and performance practice. The key word is fluidity, from fixed to free and all stages in between, from score to free improvisation, direction to collaboration, background to foreground, so not everyone's in the foreground, soul singing to completely vibrating free texture. And I always seek the best of three things: what's pre-prepared, what's devised and set in rehearsal, and what's left to be improvised in performance. So this was the process this time. Writing, so I sit down with individuals or groups of musicians and in real time generate key material. So everything you heard there that was pre-prepared was generated in my studio with me and the musicians together, not on paper, not online. Usually then captured and recorded on Logic and written down in some form. I realized, I don't know if it was karma, but I didn't put any scores in. So if I switch, George, can I switch to my screen now and show a couple of scores? You hear me okay, George?
Yeah, no problem.
Good. Okay, so this should be my score. Okay, you should see my screen now. So this was you heard an excerpt from this, I Will Write My Blues. This, in fact, I worked with this wonderful ensemble in Berlin called Ensemble Extractor recently. And when I came back from the first break, Zoran, the harmonica player, was playing this tune, and it was wonderful. So I grabbed everybody together very fast, and we worked on it, and we played it for half an hour. And then I thought we must do it in London. Zoran is a wonderful musician to work with. He spends a lot of time playing 60s blues, doesn't read music, but has an incredible ear. And as I said to him, never plays a wrong note. So this is what is on the score. But you heard an excerpt then of Max Bailey on the violin, sounding like, on the viola, sounding like Jimi Hendrix. So with, you know, against that, there's the most extraordinary things that the other musicians do. Number two is a section that cycles, might have solos or textures that build. And then number three is a held chord and a line I wrote, and then a clue for decorating from the harp, and then will be lots of improvisation around that. You heard a tiny bit of that. And this was really interesting. I wrote that chord, which is based on the notes of Zoran's tune, but Max Bailey said, no, let's do it like this, and completely resounded it for the three string players and made a much more fresh sound from it. Then you also heard a bit about Oh to Be a Hawk with Chung Yu, and she and I worked on this together, but this is all her material. And then this was one of the freer pieces where she played and others improvised with her. And I gave various signals for people to come in and out. And then there was a second section, which is a little more formalized with material. And this is an end. But you're going to hear some of this in the rehearsal we're going to play soon. So that's that. So the second part of the sequence is realization, that lovely Baroque word, realization. You have to.
Okay. Peter, yeah? Can I go back to my translation now?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Stop presenting. I've stopped presenting. Okay.
Okay, ready.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Sorry about that. So, realization is the rehearsal process, absorbing what's written, establishing the grounds, and always remember that jazz musicians say, "Don't get improvised until the drums and bass are tight." So, if there are grounds, they need to be present before you can start improvising with them. And then we create orchestrations, which I love to do spontaneously. I love to use players' ears to create spontaneous orchestrations, extra parts, decide roles, and so on. So I do use signals in that process, which keeps it moving as I use them in the performance. So this means solo, this means loop, this means copy somebody else, this means stop or play through a stop, which is fantastically effective if someone goes through a red light. Like is same to copy. Harmonize means the same rhythm but different notes, and you get amazing spontaneous harmonizations. Go backwards and forwards, repeat sections. And then the final signal is this, which is do what you like. So at some point, I let go completely, and to an individual, to the whole, and it goes off on its own. So these signals facilitate real-time creating and performing. We don't stop and I say, please will X copy Y. I just go copy. And then there's an instant, and this is so important, an instant reaction through ears rather than mind. Then in the performance, we work with what is set, but then we go on journeys. I can signal section 1, 2, 3, and at any moment the sections might intervene, the signals might intervene to take us to a whole new place. So my role then is that, of course, I'm in the middle of each stage of that process. I compose, I co-compose, not compose, co-compose, direct, help arrange, organize, I play. It's really important that I play. And I run the flow of the work, keeping momentum always. People probably get fed up with me quoting Miles Davis, but he said, you have to get them before their commenting minds begin. And that's about John Coltrane and Bill Evans. You know, even with John Coltrane and Bill Evans, you have to get them before their commenting minds begin. So I'm an agent provocateur. I look in people's eyes and see where they are, where they might go. I work with people's energies as well as their notes and instruments, and the energy of the space, the energy of the rehearsal time in the moment. So George said it'd be nice to see the process. I think I've got a video here. It's a bit crude and I'm rushing through something at the end of the day. But I think this video does give an interesting glimpse of the process. We only had 2 rehearsals. This is the end of the second rehearsal. So bird of prey, C sharp minor, bird of prey, bird of prey, bird of prey. Everybody start. Okay, let's try this one as well. Bird of prey. This means everybody like Max. It means everybody, so on my signal, everybody like Max on my signal. So the first, in fact, the third orchestra, I was with a friend and I said, there needs to be a new orchestra. It should be called the third orchestra. The instant, there was no calculation. But now I know sort of why it's called the third orchestra. The first orchestra is obvious, the symphony orchestra, the jazz big band, it's monolithic. The second orchestra is probably binary. Classical meets jazz, east meets west. People come as representatives. In the third orchestra, people come as themselves with their own unique individual lineage. Maybe someone who's played traditional Korean court music, but free jazz, or studied classical harmony, etc. So this is post-binary, it's post-identity. People are not on pedestals as representatives, all are equal. It's very, very important that. So that was my end 2 weeks ago. Let's roll backwards. Since 2011, I've been director of Club in Nagal, London, and we've put on 200 events with artists from a complete range of cultures, from a Maori shaman to Lionel Luecki, Miles Davis's guitarist, to the orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. And always in 3 parts these evenings. We play, the resident band ensemble, then the guest, then we do something together that is improvised and devised on the day. As it happens, there is a future, because we're going to have a one-off event in 2 weeks' time with the Australian Art Orchestra, who just suddenly, quite recently, will be travelling through London. And you've got the information there. This is the newsletter. They're bringing their fantastic project which works with traditional singers and a Korean vocalist, as you can see. And it's a wonderful piece called Hand to Earth that they are then taking on to Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival and to Berlin. Then if we keep going, we will then bring one of our songs, which you heard a tiny bit of from Grand Junction, written by Ruhan Gies and I. And then part 3, we will all play together. 2 orchestras together, members of Australian Art Orchestra and Third Orchestra. All of this in the basement of a law firm in Euston, who incredibly generously have donated this bar and venue to us for 10 years. So Note in Nagal was the house, and more than that, but were the house band in Club in Nagal. We've released 4 CDs with Will Self, who's a very famous writer here, based on Kafka. With Van Diemen's Land, with this wonderful folk singer Sam Lee. Expect the Unexpected, where we commissioned 17 one-page scores for, actually 22 one-page scores for the London Jazz Festival, and played them all without rehearsal, with the jazz guests playing with the band. And then most recently, although recorded in 2011, Homage to Miles Davis, which just received a 5-star review in the BBC Music magazine. So to give you one more bit of music, the CD with Sam Lee arose out of Club in Egal, and it was completely improvised, very similar to what you're about to hear. And it was so lovely, we kind of organized it, took it to the recording studio and did a whole day of more improvising with Sam and us, and that became the CD. And this then, when we released the CD, we did this performance in St. John Smith Square with Sam, and this is rather lovely, I think. So.
Oh, to me rambling boy is of pleasure. Me rambling boys beware. And if ever you go a-fowling, bring your dog and your gun and snare. For it's down, down fields and valleys green, as we were afraid to roam the land. You'll be sad to live with tigers going down to Van Diemen's Land. House we had to live upon, it was built of the sands and clay. At night we dream on England's soil of those meadows, both hot and strong. But when I awoke and my poor heart rose, I was still in a far land.
Yeah, lovely. So, note in Egal is a term in French Baroque meaning swing it, and supposedly the closest classical music came to jazz. So, note Egal, dum 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 dum. Note in Egal, dum 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 dum. So it's shift, shuffle. I love the word shuffle, the American word shuffle. Swung. So we were unequal. We shift, we experiment, we explore. And we did 21 seasons at Club in Egal, and for the moment we're not doing more seasons, and my focus is on the third orchestra. But it was an extraordinary arc from 2011 and and we recorded Envoi, the last CD to come out, just the week before the club opened, with Christophe Fellet, a wonderful Swiss percussionist. So going more backwards, I've evolved my techniques over a long period, partly as a research professor at Brunel University, where I was most generously supported by the university. I worked with many, many ensembles and orchestras, teaching them improvisation, communication skills, how to work with creative ensembles, how to work with non-musicians. I ran a course at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama for 10 years, 2.5 days a week with 20 postgraduates. And it was a wonderful laboratory. We could start with Tai Chi, we could have African drumming, we could have dance, we could do composition, all of which was to get them into being a flexible, creative, practical musician. And my goal was that all of them in the end could go out and make music in any room, anywhere, whoever was there. Other work George referred to, my prom piece was spectacular, and I was much supported by an Asian specialist, Dr. Razia Sultanova from Uzbekistan in that, and we went to Uzbekistan. We had, if you look at the photos are there, we have the Coldstream Guards, the Queen's Coldstream Guards, we have the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, we have 22 trombones behind the orchestra, 32 trumpets in the roof, and the Uzbek musicians playing with me on stage. So the Coldstream Guards were incredible, just incredible. You know, they're the guards that guard the Queen. So there was one rehearsal they couldn't come to because they were guarding the Queen. But they were just fantastic musicians. And I said, can you play like John Coltrane? Said, oh, yes, sir. And made the most extraordinary noises on their ancient trumpets. So we had the ancient trumpets of the Coldstream Guards versus the ancient trumpets, supposedly the oldest trumpet in the world of the Uzbek Khanate. So we're approaching the end now, and it'd be lovely to talk. I think winding back, I can trace now, at the time I was just confused, but I can trace now how this journey, which has much arrived in the last couple of weeks, began. In my 20s, I was quite successful as a composer and conductor. I published my Universal Edition, had my own ensemble Germany, BBC commissions, touring, and so on. But then I decided to write a series of pieces called Preludes. And I just knew I had to tread water. And I wrote 5 of them, and then didn't write very much for 15 years. And instead I worked with gamelan in Java, with leading Indian and African musicians. And I had this very deep sense of wanting to learn how music was made, not just what it sounded like. You know, what was a master drummer? What was a score? How do you learn? Do you learn at the foot of a master? Do you work with respected conventions? Or perhaps you work with 3 improvisers and things come in a very different way. So I'm always fascinated trying to understand music from around the world, but I also always wanted to understand how and why it was made, and the different cultural, I like the word sensibilities, the different sensibilities of Korea, Chicago, Tokyo, Norway, Vienna, Cairo. They're not just tunings or instruments. They are, as you, of course, we all know, deep historic cultural sensibilities, whether it's Chicago or whether it's court music in Korea. And then also at the time, I worked a great deal with children, which was incredible because it was musical literacy from scratch. I think I very deliberately did that. All bang your drums, stop. Music is sound and silence. So whatever you do, you can make any noise you want. You must stop and start with respect for other people. Then you can say, well, let's have the low drums and the high drums, or let's start soft and get loud, and then the other parameters begin to interact. But that was great to start with sound and silence. And so these kind of experiments happened within my 15 years walkabout, where I did very little conventional conducting or composing. But there were 2 special triggers for this. I wrote a piece for my ensemble Germany. By then I'd had it for 8 years. They were my friends. And I took it to them, and it wasn't a very good piece. And nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what to say. They just stared at the floor, and we were all just embarrassed because it just didn't work as a piece. Now, all those lovely players you saw on the stage would say, look, you need this at the beginning, or can I do a bass solo here, or, you know, go back home and sort out the harmonies of the 3rd section. But then they just looked at the floor, and I was really shocked by that, really shocked by that. My own ensemble, my own friends just didn't know what to say with a bad piece of mine. Then, a year or so later, I was studying in gamelan in Java, and at the end, the director asked me to write a piece for the main gamelan. So I wrote a piece using their notation, the Balungan, the number series. I took it into the room one night, or actually it was under the kraton, you know, we were out half in the open air. I took it to them and they just picked it up. I said, hey, I'm going to put this here. I'm going to add this here. Why don't we put, you know, bring in the Suling solo here? And there was absolutely no sense of ownership. It was stuff that was in the room that we all made. It wasn't taken away from me, but it was just how we worked. And the warmth and the sheer musicality, and, you know, after years of status and composers and there being a composer, a conductor, and an orchestra, here we all just got on with it. And that was quite a profound experience for me. So now anyone in the room might, in the third orchestra, might trigger the next moment, like, as you know, the famous butterfly in the Amazon affecting the world weather. There might be one pizzicato from Max, or one bent note from Rehab on the oud, or a chunky sound on the harp from Alina, and they might become a trigger for a whole new movement. But it is complicated because we're not in a stable traditional environment. Those gamelan musicians were in a tradition that had been there for hundreds of years. And so this is not free collaboration that I'm describing. I'm in the center of it, but living with those paradoxes, managing the moment. But when people talk about, for example, the work of the third orchestra as co-creative, I'm really happy with that term. It's not flat democratic sharing, neither is it directed. It's co-created with many, many different dynamics in the movements in that, which I sort of chair, I manage, I carry on behalf of everyone. So to return to the beginning, and George's starting point, where is the avant-garde now? It really made me think. It made me think maybe there's a problem with the idea of avant-garde being ahead of the game. Of course, it's long embedded in the Western canon that everything will move forward. I mean, it was kind of stable for a while before 1500, but then it's not only that it changed fast, it needed to change fast. The nature of the piano, the nature of Western harmony, the nature of expanded formal development meant that it had to survive by changing. It had to be a 4-bar cycle in Bach. It had to be a 5-hour cycle in Wagner. And that ahead of the gameness is built into the DNA of it. It's not just, oh, let's think of new ideas. It's in the nature of the material. And then it's blown apart by Mahler, Stravinsky, Schoenberg at the beginning of the 20th century. So it made me think, and then we were in a much more relativistic time, but it made me think, thinking about this, ahead of the gameness and art for art's sake, it's a very easy place to be. But actually, what if we were not ahead of the game, but in tune with the game? And in tuneness includes people, pace, and time. So being in tune is about presence. It's about a room. It's about Max on the viola, not violin as much as violin. It's about the space of Grand Junction and the incredible colors and architecture there and the incredible resonance. So a different kind of in-gameness is an in-tuneness that is of the moment rather than some sense of preceding the moment. And okay, to be a bit provocative, we've had quite a lot of sound invention since the 60s, and our friends in the 60s and 70s. We have permission to use any possible sound. We were talking earlier about resonances or microtones or the far end of the violin. But now it seems to me that this is a time also, and politically and socially and culturally, to be aware of relationships and contexts and real-time human engagement on a day in a space with a human intention, where the presence of the human is also important. They are not a violin, they are a human. But I'd be very interested to discuss this with you. So we recently founded the Third Orchestra Foundation to support the orchestra and disseminate the work and practice. Of course, if you felt like donating in whatever currency you have in Taipei, we'd be enormously grateful. Because we have a passion to take this work to the world, because I'm sure you can see that the method is something you can do with 70 children, or with a Gagaku orchestra in Japan, or with a mixture of amateur and professional musicians, because the method is based on making from what's there, as well as making at the highest level with the highest, most experienced people. And we've got several international plans in place. But thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been a particular pleasure to be able to have to put this talk together 2 weeks after what was a very important event for me, because it's acted as a beautiful end to an arc that was I could reflect back. It's just not too close to be able to start reflecting on it. So thank you very much, and thank you, George, for inviting me. And maybe we have some questions.
Thank you so much, Peter, for a wonderful and inspiring and surprising lecture. And it's I think it's a perfect culmination to the day's discussions, and I'm sure that everyone has been very stimulated by the ideas that you've shared with us, and also the musical extracts, which are absolutely stunning. I don't know where to start, really. Isabel has a question.
Okay.
I can save you. So this is like half question, half a comment, because you talk about avant-garde, and maybe this is just my impression, but I always think like when we talk about avant-garde, we always kind of relate it to kind of like the exclusivity of Western classical music. Like we have to do something super complex to kind of beat the previous generation. But maybe, yeah, I'm thinking about what I do and what you do also. It's like maybe the avant-garde nowadays is just try to forget about this exclusivity of Western classical music tradition and try to work as a society, making music more inclusive and just enjoying together as a group. Now that we have also the chance to, like communications are much better than years ago, so we have the chance to arrive to a wider audience, and we have communication. So here we are all from different places in this virtual room, so maybe we have to try to just stop thinking, or maybe this is just my thinking, that avant-garde has to be something very complex and exclusive rather than inclusive.
Simplicity is an important thing, but for me simplicity and complexity, as was said earlier, can be in a relationship. It's not that they should not be in a fight, really. Ears can open in both directions.
Yeah, because also like the way you create the music, like like with communication and collaboration, because this is a thought I have since I was like very young, like when people were saying how creative was being a musician, and when I was younger and I was just a pianist and it was so precise, and always as a kid I was asking myself, well, where is the creativity here, because I have no choice. I'm playing these scores and I need to make this so precise as this XY composer wanted me to do, and I don't feel I'm creating anything. I'm just like a machine used to keep, producing this music. So I think somehow as a performer, when we perform Western classical music, we kind of forget somehow we have a say, like we are kind of used sometimes like machines to produce this code.
Exactly.
And there is no this kind of community, which I find I play in the contemporary music for all Coma Manchester. I'm chair also, and it's this sense of community. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome, and I don't like this exclusivity of Western classical music. So maybe this is the new avant-garde, and then we should just look more to this path rather than trying to make the most complex things in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I can comment. Yeah.
I quite like the idea of tracing. You know, if you can have a simple song, and then the audience can trace, as they did a little in one of my pieces, it developing into quite a complex situation. But if the audience is with you, if they see that I've given this sign to the harp or this sign to the electronic harmonica, it may actually start to sound like Xenakis after a minute or two. But the audience are drawn, because there's nothing wrong with Xenakis. So, but the audience are drawn into hearing what is being done, and that could be D minor, or it could be a harmonica sounding like Xenakis. It doesn't matter. But what matters is they engage. You know, they're empathetic to it. They engage with it.
Yeah, because also, but it maybe sounds like Xenakis, but it's because it's the people who has the performers who are deciding this is going to sound. As when I perform with Coma, I used to perform another improvisers orchestra. You listen to the others, and then you add things to, you know, you add motives or elements to the texture. You know, you work. You are not thinking, I have this thing to play, you know, at this time, in this precise moment, with this kind of articulation. You listen to the other people, and then you create kind of live, you kind of like compose depending on what's going around you. Which, as you say, there's nothing wrong with Xenakis, and I also write traditional notated music is fine, but I feel it's like another kind of activity, you know. It's so different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I really enjoy your talk, because yeah, it just touches many topics that I'm really interested in my research. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paul.
Yeah. Hi. I found your music and your discussion really inspiring. I have a question about. I noticed a couple things, like you mentioned how you want to bring the human element into it, and it's not just a violin. And I'm wondering if I know there have been many different directions in avant-garde music, but there seems to be often a sort of a tendency towards the abstract, towards the cerebral, or the absolute music. You know, sort of coming from the, I don't know, maybe from like the mid 20th century sense of what modernism was. Like modernism was this universal sort of almost non-human direction everybody could go in together. And I know people aren't doing that now, but I'm wondering, do you think there's still echoes of that going around, and is that sort of what influences a lot of things, or is that something that people have pretty much gotten over with by now, and they're all sort of going in their own directions?
Well, not in Berlin. I was in I mean, in England, UK is has always been quite pragmatic about language. But when I was in Berlin, there's a tremendous new music consciousness as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. You know, is a groove appropriate? Is a major third appropriate? Really, people in Berlin are still nervous of one another that will be criticized for using a major third. I gave them a very hard time about that. There's really nothing wrong with a major third. And so that, I think orthodoxies are interesting, aren't they? You know, I'm naturally anti-orthodox, so I don't like, for example, the orthodoxy of complex, you know, new complexity, and I don't like the orthodoxy of minimalism when it's orthodox. We had a very funny moment at my club when my drummer came up to me and said, "Thank God the jazz police weren't here." And I said, "Thank God the new music police weren't here, and thank God the early music police weren't here. Thank God the free improvising police weren't here." Free improvisers have a huge orthodoxy that they, you know, compress one another with. So I think. But what you're talking about is quite complex, because that idea of the perfect artwork, which you get in what you're, you know, modernism, is also there in Bach. You know, it's in the whole Western tradition. It's about iconic things, iconic sound objects, and therefore they became what they became in the modern period. But it's also that notion of the work, which has a text and which is puttable in libraries and finished, is absolutely part of our long tradition. The post-library. Except, of course, we have the library of the recording now, which is, we don't have scores of Miles Davis. Well, we do, but not very meaningful. But we have incredible recordings. So we still keep things, don't we, obviously.
Peter, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
What is the significance of the image of fire for you in those two poems, the T.S. Eliot and the Ursula Rucker?
Rucker, yeah.
Yeah, Rucker.
Well, it's such a profound question. I've loved the T.S. Eliot for a long time. Ursula wrote that poem for the first performance of the Third Orchestra. People find the T.S. Eliot very hard to understand, but that ancient idea of Babylon falling and of fire, you find in Sufism, you find in Tantric Buddhism, you find it in all sorts of heightened, all sorts of traditions around the world of consummation through fire and the words like synthesis. That's a horrible word, synthesis, but like synthesis through fire. So it's but it came to me for quite personal reasons. That poetry came to me, and then I saw it in the Eliot, and I remembered it in Ursula's text. So it was a really gift it was a gift, so it's about consuming fire. It's about rising to the, oblivion through fire, as it were. Except oblivion's not. They'd have a better word in China or India, but some kind of oblivion through fire.
But doesn't this connect in some way to your musical practice and your philosophy of music, the way you want to nurture mutual respect in the rehearsal and nurture everybody's involvement in the creative process? I mean, when I see these poems, I naturally think of that it's to do with the nurturing the creative fire in all of the performers that you're working with.
Yeah. Well, yes, I hadn't thought of it. I think of it from the poetic and the spiritual point of view, but from the practical point of view, absolutely, it is about. Yeah, that's lovely, George. Yeah, absolutely. It's about. I don't know what the word is. Not releasing. It's about facilitating the fire that's in everybody, the creative fire. Absolutely, yeah. And that it's fire. It's not just It's not making little bits of stuff. At some point, it becomes fire. At some point, it becomes full passion. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to contribute some thoughts or reactions?
I could say one more thing.
Yeah.
And I almost said it earlier. And this is very, very personal. We're all friends here. When we were talking earlier with Cheng Hui about embodying sound and relationships with environment and so on. I was quite ill two years ago, and I thought I lost music. I couldn't hear my music for a period. And then only 18 months ago, I was standing near my Taoist inspirers, and I suddenly heard fire. Not the sound of fire, but the essence, the energy of fire. I heard it. And I thought, oh, the music's back. And the music was back. And That was such an important moment for me. And then somehow this performance turned to be about fire, but it's become very personal for me, because for some reason I heard fire, and then I knew I could hear again.
How did the fire sound?
Wow. Well, of course, it wasn't sound, it was energy. You know, it was fire, but that's what I mean. It was like, it wasn't all, you know, crackling and fire noise. It wasn't fire noise, it was the quality of fire, but I was experiencing that as a musician, which is sort of what we were talking about earlier. You know, it's all these octaves come together, the audio, the physical, the visual, they're all just octaves of vibration. And somehow the vibration of fire came to me then, and because I could hear it, I just thought, oh, the music's back, and it was. So it was rather magical and humbling that this performance quite naturally moved towards fire.
Wonderful, and we're all very lucky that the music came back for you, Peter, so we can have the third orchestra.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much today for a wonderful keynote address, and it's certainly changed. It's really had a huge effect upon me, and given me a lot of things to think about, and maybe given me a few potential solutions to some of the things which that I've been worrying about, and I've mentioned during the course of the day about the course of contemporary music or the future of art music. So it's been extremely useful for me personally, and I'm sure it has been for everyone else who's been listening. So thank you again, and thank you to everyone who participated through the day. And I also want to say thank you to Qiu Xingci and Zhang Yuanyu, who helped me with the translation of Peter's lecture. It was a huge task that the three of us worked on together. So, and I couldn't have done it on my own. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of the moderators during the day. I see some of them are still participating in the meeting. So thank you to all of you. And we have, I think it's it's 6 pieces. I think it's 6. It's been a long day. Compositions which were selected by the committee to be featured in the symposium. So originally it was going to be a live and online concert this evening, but because of the situation with COVID still being rather unstable, we're going to do video recordings of the pieces, and they should be ready by the end of July. So those pieces are going to be recorded by Dominant 5, which is a wonderful group based in the south of Taiwan. So watch this space. Eventually all of the material from today and also the recordings of the pieces will be on the website for you to enjoy. So yep, thanks again to everybody, and I think we can draw the symposium to a close on this note. So thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you for hosting.
Okay, thank you, Peter. You're welcome. Okay, bye everybody.